Time has always played an important role in the works of George Lucas. The opening fanfare of Star Wars makes that clear, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But it is a theme throughout other works of his as well. American Graffiti has an interesting relationship with time. The film is pure nostalgia, and even though Lucas himself is clearly celebrating an era that is lost, the characters have different preoccupations about time. John, our street racing townie, is obsessed with the past. The drag racers of old, Buddy Holly, how gas used to be cheaper for cruising around town.
Oh, shit.
Why'd you do that?
I don't like that surfing shit. Rock and roll's been going downhill ever since Buddy Holly died.
Steve is looking to the future, the relationships he will have, life away from his small town, and what his new life will be. Kurt is happy with the status quo. The present is fine with him. It is something he wants to maintain. The trifecta's preoccupation mirrors Star Wars. Obi-Wan, a man obsessed with the past. Han, the realist living in the present. And starry-eyed Luke looking to the future. The cruel irony of American Graffiti can be seen at the end of the film. John is killed by a drunk driver, Steve stays in his hometown, and Kurt is a writer in Canada. With this film taking place in 1962, we know what happens in the future. JFK gets assassinated the next year, the US involvement in Vietnam in 1965, the death of MLK Jr., and the death of RFK, both in 1968 and months apart. Their illusion of the otherworldly power of youth was coming to a grinding halt, and time would be their cruel mistress. But what is Lucas trying to convey to us with American Graffiti? Is it a monument to what was, or was it a call to return? I will let you be the judge, but let's hear what Lucas had to say about his film. I became really aware of the fact that the kids were really lost. The sort of heritage we built up since the war, talking about WW2, had been wiped out by the 60s, and it wasn't groovy to act that way anymore. Now you just sort of sat there and got stoned. I wanted to preserve what a certain generation of Americans thought being a teenager was really about, from about 1945 to 1962. It's a little bit tough to say what Lucas is trying to convey here. With language like preserve, it sounds like this film is a monument, but Lucas also says heritage. This strikes me as a call to return to tradition. To return means that the status quo must have been upended in some sort of way. We can see this time and time again in Lucas, whether it's the rise of the Galactic Empire, the android police of THX 1138, or even Queen Bavmorda attempts to subvert prophecy. These are stories, and a return is possible. Willow and friends restore Elora as Princess of the Realm. THX returns to the surface and leaves the underground society, and balance is restored to the Force. Is such a thing even possible for us? Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." And that is true, so profoundly and sadly true. Heraclitus's words remind me of the third season of The Mandalorian, which was written by George Lucas' devotee, Jon Favreau. Mandalore will never be restored to the same exact state that it existed before the Empire glassed the planet. Everything could be rebuilt, but it will never be the same, and the Mandalorian people will never be the same. The river keeps flowing, and what was is now downstream. But what does that mean for us? Should tradition and this devotion to time, honored things matter not? Whether you know it or not, I think you can tell in your heart how you feel about this. Once more, let's turn to Star Wars and one of the most famous thinkers out of jolly old England, G.K. Chesterton. G.K. once said, "Tradition means giving votes to the most obscure of all classes, our ancestors. It is the democracy of the dead. Tradition refuses to submit to the small and arrogant oligarchy of those who merely happen to be walking about." I hear a bit of old GK in Obi-Wan Kenobi.
What is it? Your father's lightsaber. This is the weapon of a Jedi Knight. Not as clumsy or random as a blaster. An elegant weapon for a more civilized age.
I think so much of the knee-jerk reaction to the more recent films was how this adherence to tradition, even a fictional one, was thrown out the window. You see it with Luke not wanting the lightsaber, and how casually the Jedi records are burned. We turn to Chesterton again. Tradition does not mean a dead town. It does not mean that the living are dead, but that the dead are alive. It means that it still matters what Penn did 200 years ago, or what Franklin did 100 years ago. I never could feel it in New York that it mattered what anybody did an hour ago. So despite Heraclitus's river never stopping, all one must do is reflect on the past and its importance. All one must do is think and not fall for the fashions of the day. Despite being written by Favreau, the baptism in the living waters of Mandalore matters despite being a story of old. It's a little on the nose, but you literally see the Mandalorians rekindle their traditions at the end of the third season when the great forges of Mandalore are lit once more. Composer Gustav Mahler once said, "Tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire." Tradition must be a living philosophy and not something dead and inert. It's why T.S. Eliot said, "It is a danger to associate tradition with the immovable, to think of it as something hostile to all change, to aim to return to some previous condition which we imagine as having been capable of preservation in perpetuity, instead of aiming to simulate the life which produced that condition in its time. A tradition without intelligence is not worth having." And one last note before we wrap up: there will always be detractors who, for whatever reason, do not feel any tie to tradition. German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's thoughts on this were that these people would simply celebrate the inverse of the tradition, everything that was the opposite of the traditional way. You even see this in Star Wars. Han Solo initially thinks the Force is fake and is a man with no cause other than himself at the beginning of the story.
Yet I've flown from one side of this galaxy to the other. I've seen a lot of strange stuff, but I've never seen anything to make me believe there's one all-powerful force controlling everything. There's no mystical energy field controls my destiny. It's all a lot of simple tricks and nonsense.
The children of the Watch are seen as fanatics.
And you are a child of the Watch.
The Watch?
Children of the Watch are a cult of religious zealots that broke away from Mandalorian society. Their goal was to reestablish the ancient way.
There is only one way. The way of the Mandalore.
Whether it is ego, hatred, or a multitude of other reasons, some people will always degrade what has come before them. So what is Lucas trying to say to us? I think we can see it in the gaze of Kurt and Luke. They gazed to the horizon, to the possibility of possibility. They weren't stoned in a basement somewhere. They weren't gazing into the black mirror of the phone. They looked to the horizon, like generation upon generations before them, thinking of the adventure to come. These men were part of a long line of youthful explorers, heroes in their own right, and weren't letting life pass them by, as Lucas was saying with the kids of the 70s. What we see in American Graffiti is a celebration of the youthful vigor. In Star Wars, we see the celebration of one's life adventure through the heroic journey. I imagine Lucas has a lot to say about today's youth, but more importantly, Lucas is right, and it is time to look to the past for a vision of the future. And it is only the heroic amongst us who can defeat the evil of our times.